booking sila. add nyo sa Facebook comment section. Thank you very much. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this semester's alternative class program. You have chosen to attend the topic, Scars Are Not Wounds, the philosophy in the K-drama, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. I'm Jech Audal, your host for this ACP session. To those in the Zoom room, you are requested to stay until the end of the activity, and to our Facebook Live audience, we are hoping that you will join us until the end of this live stream. Okay. To the Zoom room participants, we kindly remind all of you to please observe proper etiquette, remain muted for the entire talk proper of the webinar, just so we can avoid distracting our speaker and, of course, our fellow participants. And we highly encourage you, though we are not requiring, for you to open your cameras during the duration of the webinar. Finally, may we ask you to please make sure that your Zoom names are your real names for attendance check. Now, let me share to you the schedule of today's ACP. There will be two parts. First, of course, is the talk proper of our resource speaker, and the second part is, of course, the open forum. Should you have any questions relative to the presentation of the speaker or the topic, please post them down on the Zoom chat or the Add New Onsa Facebook comment section. Please state your name, the school or organization you represent, and your brief question or comments. Later during the open forum, we will address them through our speaker. No unrelated and offensive hosts, please. Let's all be respectful. E-certificates will be given to those who will finish the entire webinar and, of course, accomplish the evaluation form. We will provide you with the link later on at the end of the webinar. Okay? We hope that you will gain new and useful learning from this webinar. To properly begin this webinar, may we now invite each one of us to settle down and feel the presence of the Lord for the opening prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, its every beat I to thee forsake. For even if my thoughts fall short of knowing you, and even if my will runs terrified, your passion flings the darkness of my soul, sheds its light, breathes its life, stills the murmur of the night. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, its every beat I to thee forsake. For even if my heart falls short of loving you, and even if my spirit flies away, your love for me surpasses all my fears. I do, all I do, all I am, all that I can ever be. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, it's every beat I to thee forsake.
Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. To formally welcome us in this ACP offering, we have with us the University President, Father Roberto E. Endevera of the Society of Jesus.
My dear friends, our dear students, a good day to everyone. Diyos marahil na aldaw po sa Indogabos. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to the Alternative Class Program 2021. We can argue that during this pandemic, we are in a sense already going through alternative classes with our inability to meet face-to-face, with a lot of the learning and instruction happening online. But my dear friends, I believe the Alternative Class Program reminds us that in the midst of this pandemic and all the terrible sufferings that this crisis has caused, our education should not only continue, it should also flourish and contribute to your total formation. And that is why I am extremely happy that for our alternative class program this year, we have the theme Imagination, striving for a better normal. In striving for this better normal, we are guided by the 4 apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus. That is, these preferences of showing the way to God through the spiritual exercises, of journeying with the poor, accompanying with the youth, and caring for our common home, the earth, the environment. Using these apostolic preferences as a guidepost, I believe this alternative class program will truly provide us opportunities to go beyond the classroom or even the virtual classroom in order to fire up our imagination and to see the possibilities for human existence and human development in the midst and beyond the pandemic that we are experiencing. My sincerest thanks, most especially to the Office of Student Affairs for organizing the very impressive lineup of talks during this alternative class program. My sincerest thanks as well to all our resource speakers. My wish for all of you is that these alternative class program offerings will be an opportunity for you to truly learn and deepen your understanding of your responsibilities as men and women for others. Again, thank you very much to everyone. Salamat po, asin Diyos mabalos.
Thank you so much, Father President, for that wonderful message. I know that we are all ready and excited to begin and meet our resource speaker just from our introduction, just from our few minutes before our program to start. Okay, for this year's alternative class program on ACP. But before that, let's have a brief background about ACP. Let's all watch this.
Hello Ateneans, welcome to your Alternative Class Program, or ACP. I am Jech Audal, your OPA, or Online Public Address Announcer for the ACP. Here is what you need to know about ACP. The ACP is one concrete expression of the Ignatian Formation Program and a major student activity. It is conducted every semester to provide college students with formative topics or activities outside of their regular classroom routine and daily schedule, in support of the university's uniquely Jesuit educational goals. Instead of attending their classes for the day, students choose at least one topic or activity from among the offerings during the ACP day. Carefully selected resource speakers from different fields of specialization are invited to share their knowledge, skills, and inspire students to nurture their personal development, pursue their aspirations, and partake in social advocacies or causes. You may have missed your ACP last semester, and the organizers may not be able to implement a face-to-face ACP at this time, and until the situation permits us to return to the campus and our classrooms, but OSA and its partners are confident that their experience in delivering formation programs and student services via online platforms and the support of the university community shall help in still providing a truly formative ACP experience to students in the new setting. This semester's ACP is designed to make use of available platforms like Zoom, Google Meet, and social media streaming features. Hence, health safety protocols are observed and access of students is assured. The theme #BetterNormal, Activate Your Imagination is a call for us to break from the so-called old normal and to activate our creative imagination to understand not only our personal context, but also our social situations, and to come up with new and better ways of living in the pandemic despite the limitations. It is a challenge to do action on how we, the Ateneans, can create a better environment for us and the larger society outside the gates of the university, or shall I say, outside our online classrooms. The Better Normal channels the Ignatian concept of magis, discerning to do the greater good in new channels and media and by doing acts of service and love for God and for the nation. The ACP thus aims that the students are able to first, acquire knowledge and or skills that are relevant to one's interest, talent, skills, passion, advocacy. Next, relate or share the learning and insight gained from the topic or activity in conversation or dialogue and personal reflection. Next, examine the importance of one's interest, talent, skill, passion, advocacy to the development of the society, and seek ways or opportunities by which the gained or enhanced knowledge or skills can be further advanced and used for the benefit of the immediate organization or community or larger society. Listen, understand, discern, share, act. I hope that we will all take to heart our engagement in the ACP. Don't forget to learn and have fun while we experience ACP. Ateneans.
I hope we are all clear on why we are all here, and of course, what ACP is all about. Now, without further ado, let me introduce to you our resource speaker. Our speaker for this afternoon is a candidate for the degree in PhD Philosophy from the La Salle University in Manila. He obtained his master's degree in the same field from Ateneo de Manila University. He is teaching for 15 years now in Ateneo de Naga University, where he also served as the chairperson of the philosophy department. He specializes in hermeneutics, contemporary metaphysics, and philosophy of religion. His publications include poetry and essays, research articles on contemporary philosophies, and, of course, his latest project is bringing philosophical discussions in his Facebook page, TikToks, Everyday Philosophers. And with that, of course, our resource speaker would very much appreciate if you give it a like and a follow on Facebook. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome you, our speaker, Sir Adrian Remodo.
Hello, welcome to our session for this year's alternative class program. I thank the Office of the Student Affairs for inviting me once again to be one of the lecturers for this event. So as you can see, this session is about the K-drama. It's okay to not be okay, and we're going to do some philosophizing about the themes included in this series. So it doesn't matter though if you haven't watched the series yet. I hope that this lecture will be a good guide for you to appreciate this very, very beautiful and intelligent story. Nevertheless, just a heads up, there are many spoilers along the way, so you just brace yourselves for those spoilers. Okay, so we begin. So our goal for this presentation is to discuss the intricate relationship between memory and narrative. We make sense of the world and of ourselves by creating stories, isn't it? When somebody asks us, "Who are you?" we gather the details about ourselves and make and weave one comprehensible, intelligible story out of the facts that we can remember. The same is true, for example, when somebody asks you, "So what happened?" You begin answering that question through stories. So much of our storytelling activities is rooted from what is stored in our memory, what we include or exclude, highly depends on our capacity to remember. So that's why there is an intimate relationship between memory and narrative. You can only tell something, okay, when you can remember that something. Okay? So this intimate relationship becomes problematic when we encounter the fact that traumas happen. A traumatized memory can automatically dissociate its content from the fact of the event. Trapped in the violent content of the past, it too can fail to move on to the present. If memory fails, then the narrative we create also becomes problematic. Why? Well, how do you give account to something when you have a what? You have a failing memory. So, may problema na kaagad yung kwentong bubuuin mo kung mayroon ng problema yung memory mo. And so, our problem therefore in this gathering, in this session is, what happens to the construction of identity when memory and narrative fail? Because we say that we give account to ourselves by the narratives that we create about ourselves. So, if my memory fails to give the proper data in the story that I am trying to construct about myself, then the way I see myself also becomes problematic. That is our philosophical problem for this afternoon. So I use the K-drama, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, to expound on this problem, using the lenses of psychology, psychoanalysis, and a little of neuroscience. I wish to confront the issue of memory and narrative philosophically. In the end, I propose, following Ricoeur's hermeneutics of memory, how can we salvage the notion of identity by confronting traumas? Okay, so that will be the goal, the problem, and the structure of our presentation. So, here's the parts of our presentation. We will begin with an exposition on what narratives are. Then, the second part, we will now be confronting the issue of a traumatized memory. And the third, which is now on towards the resolution to our problem, we're going to talk about scars and wounds. So here we're going to talk about remembering and forgetting. And we end up by concluding, by giving some concluding reflections on the things that we have discussed. Okay? So we begin. Let's start with the idea of the narratives. We begin with this undeniable fact about human existence. And what is that? That we try to make sense of ourselves and of the world in general. For as humans, the world is not just a disparate, separate set of facts or data or objects or faces. Its existence, the way we exist, is about the struggle to find meaning on why things are. So, the fact is that we create meanings as much as meanings create us. No wonder why even the existentialist Albert Camus, who espoused that life is inherently meaningless, argued that we have to invent meanings if we have to survive, if we want to survive the inherently absurd human life. Okay? We cannot escape this need to create meaning. If we want to invent, if we need to invent, then we have to, if only to survive life. Okay? Now, one way of making sense of our existence, that is to say, one way of making meaning, is through narrative. We make and tell stories about the world. As Harari in his best-selling book, Homo Deus. You have to read that book. It's really excellent, interesting. Situates the movement of human history up to the Anthropocene, this current history that we have, precisely in this capacity to tell stories. According to him, it was through the weaving of stories that human cooperation and social formation were made possible. From religious to the economical, from the individual to the political, all this made sense to us through the stories that we told each other. So, we have to stress further that stories actually serve as kind of existential laboratory. What do I mean by that? I mean that whenever we read a story, for example, fictions, we can actually imagine possible state of affairs that can happen to our own very lives if in case that thing happens to us too. So, as what the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur says, stories offer us the imaginative variations of ourselves. Stories make us live in the dimension of that. I imagine myself, I open myself to different possibilities of existence. Okay? In your ethics classes, for example, there are many ethical cases being given, and you feel the trauma, you feel the dilemma in each situation because you understand the story behind the dilemmas given by your professors. And so that's what we mean when we say existential laboratory. Okay, I can interpret, I can imagine myself in the story that I read. Okay? Di ba? Feeling mo, ikaw mismo yung bida na pinapakilig ng isa pang bida. Pero feeling mo lang yon. Sorry. Okay, so finally, we need stories as one of the ways to access other minds. So, there are many things that can be learned about life and human experiences, and the wisdom that comes with them are relayed to us through stories. We talk about empathy, solidarity with others. These things become possible when we get to understand and be with them in the accounts that they give about their lives. As Paul Ricoeur says, a grief narrated is a sorrow shared. If this is the case, a potent way of understanding and accessing alterity or otherness, other minds, is listening to what they have to say about their lives. Hence, narratives. Films, TV series, even music are narratives too. We also read these genres, and it is through this character of readability that they attain the being of a text. As texts, they are open for interpretation, which in philosophy we call hermeneutics. So our discussion, this session, especially revolves on the narratives of the brothers Moongangte and Moonsangte. Okay, so these brothers come from a very traumatic childhood. Okay, with Sangte actually witnessing their mother being murdered. Gangte therefore accepts the responsibility of taking care of his older brother, and the story will, as the story will reveal later in much later episodes. Okay, Gangte accepts the responsibility not only because he has the goodwill to his brother, to his autistic elder brother, but actually as a payment, a compensation for a guilt he was silently carrying in him. Now, adding also to this already heavy plot is the character of Kumunyang, okay, who is also a very well-received children's literature writer, and who is also raised by a very mentally, psychologically abusive family, especially her mother. Okay? So, her mother told her that she cannot trust anybody, and growing up, she lived by the shadow of that admonition and became antisocial. Okay, so I have here a short clip. This is, how do you call this? A trailer. So you can have a glimpse of what are the highlights of. So, oh wait. So how do we proceed now? Okay, sorry for that. So, well, the love story of Munyang and Gangtae is itself a colorful narrative. I see, however, that this love story between Munyang and Gangtae is only a minor plot to the main premises that the film offers. And what are these? First, the traumas linger long after they happen. Second, hurt people hurt people. Or you can say, hurt hearts hurt hearts. We need others to heal from our traumas. And lastly, the series tells us that narratives are efficacious ways to confront and heal from our traumas. Okay, so the series is very much intelligently woven. I guarantee that for those who haven't seen this series yet. That we have to mention here that the major parts of it happens in the OK Psychiatry Hospital, where Gangtae works as caregiver. This detail, I must say, is genius, as the whole narrative actually invites us to take a look and empathize not only with those who are clinically diagnosed and admitted to the hospital, but to the characters themselves who are having a lot of psychiatric baggages. In fact, from episode 1 to the finale, the audience, that's us, is invited into seeming to big psychiatric hospital, and everyone in the story becomes the patients. As the drama of this character unfolds, little do we know that we become the therapists ourselves. We become the therapist to these characters involved in this narrative. Okay, so we move now to the second part of our session for this afternoon. Let's now talk about trauma as a plot. So, any well-constructed story begins with a very strong plot. Any narrative, the strength of a narrative depends highly on how the plot is constructed. Like the foundation of any building, the plot must be able to pull together all the elements contained in a story so that no unnecessary or lame detail can be found. In Poetics, Aristotle explains that the plot is what arranges the story into a whole and also what gives reason for the actions that are happening within such story. So, take away the plot and the whole easily crumbles apart. The essence of a plot, thus, is to represent a single action, and a whole one at that, and its part, the incident, ought to be constructed that when some part is transposed or removed, the whole is disrupted and disturbed. That's the crucial part of the plot. Okay, a weak plot will not be able to hold the story. Okay, a problematic plot will also render the whole story problematic, right? Kaya nga, kung gusto mong paniwalaan ka, dapat magaling yung plot mo. Okay? Halimbawa, you are lying. Well, not all can be good liars. Why? Because to lie is to create a comprehensible, believable story. And how do you do that? By making sure that your plot is intelligent. Okay? May isang detail lang dyan na hindi masyadong fit doon sa ginagawa mong narrative, then the discussion or your proposition crumbles apart. Okay? Paul Ricoeur calls this as implotment. It is the act where the heterogeneous elements are synthesized into one intelligible whole. As such, the disparate events and characters are made related to each other, given a concordance out of such discordance, and configured to a certain level of permanence when a plot mediates them. For example, that fateful day when Sangtae wanted very much to attend the book signing event of Munyang was made to be more than just mere coincidence for Sangtae to find the love of his life. Thanks to the plot, coincidences becomes necessary events for the story to unfold. As Ricoeur says, okay, sorry for that, it inverts the effect of contingency in the sense of that which could have happened differently or which might not have happened at all by incorporating it in some way into the effect of necessity or probability exerted by the configuring act. So when we create a plot, everything becomes essential. There are no coincidences now, right? So kung titingnan mo, halimbawa, iisipin mo yung love story mo. Di ba? Halimbawa, naglalakad ka lang naman sa may Ateneo Avenue. Okay? Tapos palabas siya ng gate. Okay? Nakita mo siya. It can just be what? It can just be coincidental. But once you start narrating your love story, you will realize that in such moment, you are at the right time, you are at the right place, that you encountered each other. So, that she was going out of the university and you are just, spending your carefree moment, your free time in the Ateneo Avenue, then suddenly it makes sense. Because of the plot, everything becomes related to each other. From concordance or from discordance, everything becomes concordant. So from the coincidental to the necessary event. Okay? So that's what the plot gives us. Okay? That's why, as we have already said earlier, that's the importance of the plot. It gives the reason of being why things happen in a story. So, if a plot is lame, then it cannot give reason why things happen. Kaya nga, di ba, may sinasabi tayo, bakit ganun? O anong nangyari doon? O ano nang nangyari doon? Or, kapanipaniwala ba yun? Di ba? May mga, hindi lahat ng sinasabi sa kwento, hindi natin matanggap. Kasi nga, hindi siya supported ng plot. Okay? So, if you want to become a good writer, make sure you have a very strong plot. Meanwhile, because characters become who they are only in the world of the narratives, we are able to recognize them through the actions that they do or the actions that they receive from other agents. In this series, for example, Sangtae will always be the younger brother who thought of killing his autistic brother to unload himself from the burden of taking care of him. In the same manner, we would always think of Munyang, of the mother of Munyang, that's Yang Nam, as the murderous villain, the reason behind the traumas of the main characters. We recognize those names by how the plot has made them to be. Indeed, implotment is a tricky business. Because plot gives permanence to the story, the author becomes a powerful being, a godly one, so to speak, because he has the power to decide what happens to whom, who lives or dies, who suffers or who is rewarded. Right? That's the power of the writer. That's our power when we tell stories, right? ikaw yung may kakayahan kung sino yung gagawin mong kontrabida. Okay? Kung pwede mong gawing bida ang sarili mo sa mga kwento mo. Okay? Pwede mong, kahit ikaw yung kontrabida talaga sa totoong buhay, pwede mong i-twist yung plot. Okay? To make yourself appear good to other people. Right? So, that's what we do when we plot. Okay? That's why there can be the ethics of implotment, but that's for another session. Now, the recognition of these characters, so for example, Sangte, Munyang, why do we remember these names in the story? Because the recognition of these characters is the identification of their identity. This is what we call narrative identity. When I hear the word Gangte, I easily remember him as this younger brother of Sangte, so this the autistic elder brother of Gangte. Right? So, kahit naman sa ating buhay, di ba? Kapag sinabi mong Adrian Remodo, kung nagi kang estudyante ni Remodo, may character siya sa kwento mo. Okay? Pag sinabi natin Duterte, may character siya base sa kung nasaan ka sa kwentong binubuo mo. Okay? So, just like in stories, when we are asked to give account of who we are, we tend to tell our biographical accounts. But biographies can only make sense if we can point the plot of our lives. And while we are weaving together the pieces of our life stories, which ones are we going to highlight and which one deserve to be a minor detail, for example, life itself becomes more intelligible or comprehensible to us. Like the stories and movies that we watch, we come to understand why certain things happen, why those actions were committed, why some relationship ended, and so on. Okay? This is where and how our narrative identities emerge. Okay? But what happens when narratives are implanted by a traumatized memory? Remember that this is our problem for this session. We see the difficulty of this question not only in the main characters in the series, but actually with all the patients in the OK Psychiatric Hospital. How they give account to their selfhood and to the world is paralyzed by their post-trauma memory. The consequence is that their narratives, okay, are not necessarily faithful to what happened, and much more, the memorial paralysis disables the character to interpret the present state of affairs, which are already different from the past. Okay? Therefore, there is a problematic gap between the implanted memory and the event as such. Okay? Our memory, if it is traumatized, it is no longer really faithful to what happened. So, if our identity is a narrative identity and the source of this identity is the plot, and plot is sourced out also from memory, then there is really a problem when narratives are implanted by traumatized memory. Okay? So, look at this, some signals of traumatized memory. So we name here, for example, the cognitive emotional disorientation, where speakers may lose their sense of exactly where they are within the story as well as in reality, yet continue to recount the event of utter unintelligible words in trying to express themselves until they break down in tears or come back to themselves, or until they are comforted and relaxed by the interviewer. There is also psychological dissociation, where individuals tend to automatize behavior, experience analgesia, separate mental experience from physical ones, and compartmentalize devastating experiences. So, If this is the case, there is already an obvious problem with the notion of narrative identities. Who I say I am, who I say that I am, can be filtered, can be a filtered account, right? Consciously or subconsciously, we may say. It can be a filtered account and no longer a faithful account when such implantment comes through the screen of traumatic experience. So, like for example, emotional disorientation. I no longer know what really am I feeling. Okay, if I am asked, for example, to recount some events, okay, I am already lost as to what I feel. Who am I in the story? I no longer know whether I am the victim or I am the perpetrator because of disorientation and dissociation. If this too happens, then how can I really give account to my narrative? How can I give account to the question of who are you? Okay, so the American Psychological Association in 2016 defined trauma in this way. It is an emotional response to a terrible event like an incident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives. So, while this, of course, traumas, of course, are different types. There are different classifications, levels of trauma. I wish to limit the understanding of trauma in this sense. Specifically, it is of what the APA has highlighted here, that it is the incapacity of the individual to cope and move on from the shock brought by violent event. Every one of us experiences shock, okay, violence, but a traumatized memory is paralyzed. It becomes incapacitated to move on from that event. So, the rise of neuroscience, okay, also further gave new understanding of what traumas are. Okay, so we have our own neurophilosopher, Dr. Ray Francis Hernandez. Okay, in his book, published in Germany from Munich University. Okay, so the neuroethics, nootropics, and neuroenhancement in his book, okay, explains the neurobiology of memory via the Atkinson and Striffen multi-store model, where, according to this model, the process of memory formation begins with a stimulus from the environment. The stimulus is perceived by the senses and hence registered as a sensory memory in a matter of seconds. SM, sensory memory, interprets this information and either passes it on to the short-term memory or simply loses it. Information that gets passed onto the STM is then either restored as a long-term memory or not relayed at all. So, in short, it's from this stimulus, then it is recorded as a sensory memory. Then it can either be recorded further by our brain as a short-term memory or a long-term memory. If it doesn't pass the short-term, then we simply forget it. Okay, it's simply erased. Okay, from our mind, and you know this, right? Not everything is recorded in our mind, and thankfully, not everything. Imagine if everything is recorded in our mind or in our brain. So, from this model, Hernandez explains how, from the findings of science, a single nerve cell that fires upon experiencing an event would fire over and over again upon remembering the same experience. And thus, through a process of consolidation, it finally becomes a lasting memory, diffuses across the cortical regions, and reinforced by long-term potentiation, a process whereby the neurons involved in the patterns of neural activity become strongly connected. So the memory becomes pervasive, if that is the case, that it becomes deeply embedded in how one gives an account of an experience. A learned memory would interpret the same stimulus in the same way, and Hernandez agrees what has been learned is usually very hard to unlearn. Okay? So, this is how memory also attains a hermeneutic role. Okay? It interprets the stimulus, the place, and the object, for example, in the same way in each event of the encounter. Okay? So, as we experience an event, memory is built to keep this experience, if it is somehow deemed significant, and reopen the recording when it might be useful or triggered by an associated event. So, the more lasting the memory is, the more it becomes a commanding hermeneutic button. So, just like, Hernandez explains to us, when the stress or arousal is of sufficient magnitude, the nervous system acts on it chiefly by committing it to memory. So, and hence, we are back to the question. What happens if the stimulus is traumatic? What happens to our narratives? So, if we follow the discussion so far, if through by using psychology, psychoanalysis, and neuroscience, that because the stimulus is stored as a long-term memory, so whenever I encounter that kind of stimulus, I am always reminded over and over again of the same event. Okay? So, let's take, for example, Sancte here. The Sancte's memory of the butterfly. Early episodes in the series would not reveal why Sancte trembles upon the sight or memory of the butterfly. In the middle of the series, it was revealed that Sancte has a long-term memory of his mother's murderer, a woman with a butterfly pin on her jacket. The experience was understandably traumatic and justifies why Sancte despises butterflies. Each event of the butterfly is a grim reminder of that fatal night when her mother was looking for him and was murdered right before his eyes by the woman with a butterfly pin. That was the story behind why Sancte was very, very afraid, or is always afraid, by the thought and the sight of a butterfly. So, if that is the case, following here the arguments, so hermeneutically I interpret the every event of butterfly as a reminder of the murderer. And neuroscience would agree to that. And psychology and psychoanalysis would also agree why my brain functions in that way. Right? So, and that's precisely our problem. In a traumatized memory, I give account of who am I, and this accounting of myself is what? Is based on a stimulus that is repeated over and over again, and it can no longer move on from that instance of the trauma, from that experience of the violence. Okay? So, here we see that the long-term traumatic memory is a memory paralyzed in pain. Notwithstanding Sangte's autism, he too, he too had to carry that burden of the memory. In fact, in the series, okay, uh, it presents Sangte's condition as what? As also, Sangte has this very, very sharp memory. It's also intensified by his autism. So, also, Munyang, the writer, okay, Munyang has to live with her hate after witnessing his father trying to strangle his mother. Okay? So, everybody in that OK psychiatric hospital precisely gives account to their world, gives account to who they are because of their traumatic memory. Okay? So that is their narrative identity now. Okay? But as we now see, though traumatic memory can be false memories. Okay? And because traumatic memories can be false memories, therefore, the way you give account to yourself can also be false. And there we find the philosophical problem that we are trying to discuss this afternoon. So, the intricate relationship between memory and narrative is rendered problematic with respect to its fidelity to the event. Okay? It is a hermeneutic problem in the sense that what is interpreted is betrayed by the mental and psychological screen that blocks the agent from properly giving account to herself both in the past and in the present. Okay? So, that's why even epistemologists in philosophy, okay, if you are interested, they would always question, can testimonies be reliable justifications of knowledge? Can narrative accounts be reliable sources of knowledge? Well, in fact, okay, there are many things that can happen in our mind that can corrupt our accounting of the event, our testimonies. Okay? Yun yung problema sa mga testimonial evidence, di ba? Paano kung mali yung nakita mong color? Or from ng color nung sabi mo the suspect is wearing red. Paano kung may tumama lang na ilaw at akala mo red pero pink pala? So, nakita mo na memories are not always faithful. Okay? So, in the same way that traumas, that's the effect of trauma to our memories. Sabi dito, di ba, it blocks the agent from properly giving account to herself both in the past and in the present. So, Gangte, for example, always carries this burden in his being. Once, according to the story, okay, he wanted to get rid of his autistic elder brother. He saw him as the burden to his life. He could not play freely, could not go on his own, because their mother always made it a rule that he cannot leave his elder brother alone. One day, Gangte excitedly went home after winning his red belt in martial arts, but he found out that Sangte, the autistic older brother, was already home and was actually beaten by other boys. So instead of getting his mother's adulation, he ended up getting scolded and beaten too by his mother. In that instance, he shouted how he wished his brother just die so he can be free. Now, one time while they were playing, Sangte fell in a river, and while crying for help, Gangte suddenly got confused. Is he going to leave his brother alone to die? And therefore he can now be free? And after taking some steps away from his elder and helpless brother, he again decides to come back and saved him. It was a memory that punished him. it was an event that he thought Sangte never remembered because he never spoke about it. The brothers were both wounded by those events. And because of that wound, Gangte would always see himself as a what? As a failure brother. Sangte would always see himself as the one that is a burden to the family. Okay? That is how they give account to themselves. Or Munyang, the writer, would always look at herself as what? As not capable of loving and not worthy of being loved, because that's her memory tells her who she is. Okay? And one symptom of a traumatized memory is what we call repetitive or compulsive reporting. According to this clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, okay, repetitive or compulsive reporting is a distressing experience, is where a distressing experience is retold in its entirety or with an extraordinary reiteration of its minute details, time and time again, as if the narrator is unable to move on, which is in contrast to his or her style of narration in the rest of the account. Okay? Or Johnson described it as the repetition compulsion represents an incapacity to learn due to a traumatic event. According to this clinical psychologists, when a subject has traumatized memory, he repeats and repeats and repeats his story with that same intensity as the first moment that he experienced it. Okay? The subject relieves the event as it happened in extraordinary detail, forcing the same physiological and psychological and even emotional reactions. Okay? Yun yung kapag may traumatic experience. You repeat the event as if it just happened yesterday. Okay? Sariwang-sariwa pa, sabi nga natin. So for our purposes, okay, so this is how we describe the compulsive repetition, that it is actually a pathological abuse of memory. Not because you repeat, you remember. Okay? As we have already pointed out, a painful stimulus can create long-term memory about an event which can be so focused alone in what is stored in such stimulus response. And because it is traumatized and because your mind is just focused on that one stimulus, okay, the vivid recollection of a traumatized memory can wrongly misinterpret the event, and much more, can filter the event to suit the plot that the trauma offers to the memory. In this case, memory resists any other possibilities of implantment because, okay, sorry. So, memory resists any other possibilities of implantment because it has only one account of what happened. Okay? A traumatized memory, it has cognitive bias. It cannot accept any other account. Okay? That's why there is this a dysfunction on the way we interpret, the way we accept the world if we are traumatized. Okay? So, biases can occur both in coding, in the coding and in recovery in our brain. Okay? And we remember events that did not occur even. Okay? Because of that false memories, sometimes in order to suit your plot, to suit your narrative, you actually add, maybe consciously or subconsciously, you tend to add more details into your story, which actually, in reality, those details are not there. Okay, so that's what happens when we have a pathological memories. So in the series, for example, Gante formed the belief that his father did not love him as much as she took care of Sangte, and lived his life accordingly based on that experience of being hit by his mother because he left Sangte alone. Okay? Ricoeur follows this psychoanalytic. Let's go. So let's move into this slide. Ricoeur follows this psychoanalytic finding in locating the problems of narrative identities. He says the diseases of memory are basically diseases of identity. And why is that so? If the narratives I create to give account to myself are rooted from pathological memory, then my concept of selfhood is also problematic, let alone pathological. False memory means false narrative, means, and ultimately it means false identity. The resistant and recalcitrant memory brought by trauma lives on how it wants to present the world regardless of its truth value. The way a traumatized memory narrates, it doesn't care whether it is right or wrong. Okay, according to the traumatized memory, whatever it says is the right thing. Okay, so hence the traumatized memory, if it wants to be healed, must move from remembering to forgetting. Okay? So we are now moving, our discussion now is moving towards healing. So how do we confront the memory? If there is a pathology of remembering, then the traumatized memory must learn how to forget. But how do we forget? It is on this question that we find another very crucial character in the story, Dr. O.G. Wang, the head of the OK Psychiatric Hospital. He personalizes the psychoanalyst or therapist who interprets the stories of the patients. His method may be unconventional at times, but his years of experience have given him the aptitude to really access the minds of the admitted patients. The stories that the patients tell reveal to the doctor the memories contained therein. Dr. G. Wang tolerantly waits until the patient becomes ready to tell another version of the story. That's very important there. To tell another version of the story. Remember that, as we have said, a traumatized memory would repeat over and over again his version of the story. But as we have seen in this series, the healing actually begins when the patient now becomes ready to tell another version of the story. So we see therefore that from the story that the journey of the patients to arrive to this healing is a painful journey, even violent confrontation with it also involves violent confrontations with their memories. This is not surprising. The to and fro movement of the patient's reception of the process is itself a psychological mechanism. Traumatized memory solidifies its narrative that it takes a truly long and arduous effort to move forward. And here, Dr. O.G. Wang is the patient listener, okay? The patient receiver and interpreter of stories until he guides his patients to what? To entertain another possible plot of his memory. So, how do we forget? Accordingly, Ricker gets back to Freud's notion of melancholia and mourning and explaining why patients find it very hard to move on. Compulsive retelling is melancholia, a narrative that cannot confront the past and its pastness because actually the patient subconsciously gets pleasure from it. It is used to justify and validate the actions in the present. This explains, for example, why after the breakup, you spend nights crying and scrolling your ex's photos in his Facebook while listening to Moira. Diba? Akala mo nasasaktan ka, but actually, it is melancholia. Diba? Akala mo lang nasasaktan ka, pero the fact that, or the thought that nakikita mo pa yung picture niya, okay, parang andyan pa rin siya sa'yo. O diba? Plus Moira in the background, okay, and maybe a beer. So, then you start reliving all your moments together, and you, what? You relive it as if andyan pa siya sa'yo. So, hindi ka talaga nasasaktan. You are actually taking a pleasure from memory. Okay? So, it's diba? And then you start what? You start creating stories about you, about your relationship, diba? You cannot accept that it has ended already. Sino mga tinamaan? Okay? Now, the work of mourning, on the other hand, accepts the loss. The loss of what? Okay? So, mourning is a reconciliation with what? With the loss of some objects of love. Objects of love may be persons, of course, but also, as Freud says, abstractions like fatherland, freedom, ideals of all kinds. What is preserved in mourning and lost in melancholia is self-esteem, or the sense of oneself. So, what is present in mourning is therefore the acceptance of the past in its pastness, including the things lost in that time frame. Here, you no longer go into that melancholic remembering in order to give to still get pleasure from the memory, but what? You are now moving towards the truth. The truth of what? The truth that you have lost something. Okay? That's what. So pleasure bows down to truth in this stage of mourning. Okay? Now, but reality is too big for a traumatized memory to accept, and so the therapist must patiently guide to work through the memory in order that it can once again accept itself that it can once again accept the truth. Okay? As Ricker suggests, the patient has to realize step by step, degrees by degrees, the orders dictated by reality. So, when the traumatized memory opens itself already to this mourning, then it slowly moves from remembering to forgetting. Okay? So, but how is it now to forget? Why is it that we are talking about forgetting, but we are talking about accepting the truth? Isn't it that to accept the truth is to remember the truth? So how can it be remembering, therefore? Okay? Well, it is because to forget is not to obliterate the event. In fact, to forget is to remember what happened. Okay? But it is a special kind of remembering. To forget is to see the event in its proper time frame, in its right context, and to accept the event as it was. In cases of traumatic memories where narratives are trapped in the dissociative and compulsive remembering. To forget is to mourn the loss incurred and be settled in the truth. Forgetting is remembering the event as a trace. So when you forget, you actually remember what happened, but now you see it in its pastness. You see it in its truth. Okay? Because when something is totally erased in your mind, then there is nothing to forget because there is nothing to remember in the first place. Okay? So, let's have some... Let's take, for example, this clip where Gangtae and Sangtae finally confronted their issue as brothers. Remember that story where Gangtae wanted to abandon him to abandon Sangtae while he was drowning in the river. So here is a very dramatic event, a dramatic narrative of how Gangtae and Sangtae confronted each other by each other's memory of that event. So let's listen to this and watch this short clip. So that was a very painful scene, knowing the context of the pains that these two characters are harboring in their hearts, or that their memories are bringing into their relationship. So confrontation, painful and violent it may be, seems to be the way that we can truly face our memory. Okay? Trauma causes cognitive biases, which implies not only the precision or imprecision in the treatment of information, but rather describes the preference of favoring of information that has certain emotional valence or value or meaning while processing the data from environment. And to counter this bias, the agent must be guided to free trapped memories, to manipulate memories, to confront the past. Okay? Memories to confront the past to confront the past is one of those ways. Okay? So, let us go back to our notion of the narrative. To forget is never to eliminate the details in the story that caused us pain. We have to tell them. We have to tell those painful narratives. We have to remember them as they serve as our guideposts in learning and growing from life. Forgetting means that the way we implot the events in the stories that we create attain a better perspective, where such better may even go against the way we wanted it to appear. To forget is to tell otherwise, to tell another story. Here, memory moves from the tendency to repeat compulsively. Memory becomes what it is, a record of what happened in the past. So from the cognitive bias, from the trapped memory of having just one plot of what had happened, when someone starts to forget already, he starts what? He starts accepting things that can even challenge his very own account of what had happened. To forget, this is what we mean when we say to forget is to tell otherwise, to tell another story. Meaning to say, I already move away from the tendency to compulsively repeat what my memory has given me. Okay? So, as a conclusion now, okay, finally, the conclusion, the traumatized memory lives in woundedness. Healing, which we call forgetting, is when we realize that we are no longer wounded but scarred. Scars are there to remind us of a time that we were wounded, and scars remain to show us the present where we are no longer wounded. The distance, of course, between these two time frames is filled with detours of drama, stories, more violence perhaps, and thus can be a long journey. But time gives, and scars arrive. Here is another story, okay, another clip on what happened now to Gangtae and Sangtae after that very painful confrontation about their childhood and how they start forgetting what happened. Okay? So, okay, so from what we have been discussing here, we see that in the process of constructing our identities, where memories undeniably play a major role, to move from the pathological memory and therefore false identity to a reconstructed, retold identity is to be able to move beyond the trauma of our lives. Of course, it is easier said than done. That's why we need the guides, right? We need, sometimes we need medicines for this. Okay, not only a therapist, but medications can really help in confronting our traumas. And as our discussions have pointed out, this construction of identity is a work of mourning, always a play between remembering and forgetting. So we end on a note on a central metaphor of the story of the "it's okay not to be okay." It utilizes this metaphor all throughout the narrative, the butterfly. Okay? It was the plot of a trauma that brought together characters and their individual agonies and pathologies. But as the narrative reaches the climax and eventually goes down to the happy ending, we get to the point of the image of the butterfly. Remember that, it was the source of pain for the three of these major characters. Okay? Gangtae and Sangtae, and their memory of the woman who killed their mother. And Munyang, who realized that the murderer is the mother of Munyang. Okay, the one who had a butterfly pin on her jacket. But the power of this insect is its capacity for metamorphosis from an ugly caterpillar to the beautiful winged insect. The series presents this metaphor as the metaphor of the pathological memory into a healed memory. So, with this, we hope that trauma is not the last word in our stories, but one of freed selfhood, a forgiven narrative, a happy memory, a narrative of being wounded to live happily with, or even with, scars. Because we now note that wounds are not scars, and scars are not wounds. It is the movement of the memory to a pathological memory to a happy memory, and eventually to our healed identities. Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope you learned something from this presentation. So, that's all for my lecture. I am now ready for your comments, reflections, and questions. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Sir Adrian, for the wonderful and, of course, a roller coaster of a presentation, spoilers included. Okay? Because now, I hope everyone has the same sentiments as I did, because now we are now open for your comments, questions for our speakers. Of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts, which can be in the forms of questions, sharing of insights and realizations. Again, to facilitate our open forum, click the raise hand button and wait for your name to be called before unmuting to speak. You may also use the chat box to send your questions, and I will read them for you so the speaker can address it. Okay? Okay, while you are getting ready with your questions, we will first have our first reaction from Miss Judy Udong. Miss Judy?
Good afternoon po. Okay lang po hindi ko na-open ang camera ko. Before anything else, I would like to compliment you, sir, for giving us an insightful discussion about how can we relate to the K-drama series. It's okay to be not okay to a trauma that most of us might experience already, but we are not just aware of it consciously. Because as it was defined a while ago, traumas, specifically childhood trauma, tends to be the reason why we behave like today. And I, as well, also hope that traumas is not really the last word to each of our stories. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir. Aside from childhood trauma, traumas can also occur from past relationships, right? Of course, I wouldn't want to limit it between boyfriends and girlfriend relationship, but also from those who were our close friends yet became stranger to us, which eventually causes us to trust less, like that. For you, sir, what do you think can we do to survive or face um um face the fear of trauma of being attached to people again? Do we have to just accept that it is now part of our identity, or wait until someone comes in to help us heal that kind of situation? That's all po. Thank you.
I thank you, Judy. First, let me comment on that question. That can trauma still happen today? Of course, right? It can happen. In fact, right, how the APA has defined trauma. It's an experience of pain, but we are stuck into that experience. Now, everybody experiences pain. It's a human experience, right? We experience rejection, we experience pain, but what defines trauma is that paralysis of the memory to move on from that experience into the present. Okay, so for example, a teacher scolds you in the classroom. It can be traumatic, right? I have lots of students who would really perform well in the oral exams. Okay, or I mean in the in one-on-one exams, but during the class recitation, they would not even dare to speak. And if I ask them, why did I miss this chance of listening to you in the classroom? And then they would tell me, because each time the teacher calls him or her, it reminds him of the teacher who scolded him in front or in the classroom. So it's what trauma is all about. Okay? And to your other question, so should we just accept it? Well, your psychologist, your psychiatrist would say, no, we have to work on this trauma because we can actually identify them. So, some of them we can identify, right? Some of these traumas we cannot identify because it can happen subconsciously. But for those that we can identify, then we have to work on them. We have to confront them. And yung tanong mo na, should we just wait for someone? Well, this can be cheesy, but yeah, sometimes someone can really take away your traumas, right? It takes someone, just like the notion of, how do you call this? The notion of the pharmacon. Kaya nga may pharmacy, di ba? The pharmacon. The one, what what hurts you is the one that heals you. So sometimes that's how we confront traumas too. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much po, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Our second reactor for this topic is Mr. Hector Santiago. Heki, how are you? Hello, Heki. Okay, I believe Heki has a bit of technical problems. I guess we can now move on to, I believe this is a reaction, sir, or a comment from Dara Sofia Cartujano from the chat. I guess the worst part about having a traumatic memory is the sudden flashback. Something will remind you of the event, and then you have a hard time breathing and thinking properly because of the memory. You thought you have moved on, but sadly, you have not. The thought that you have not moved on is sometimes worse than the memory itself. Any comments towards that,
I
sir?
agree. I totally agree with that comment. And but let me just get clear, huh? I am not from psychology. I am from the philosophy, so I am trying to philosophize on this. So but you see, today philosophizing should really be informed by other disciplines. And yes, Dara, I really agree with this one, right? Sometimes, and that's precisely what I was calling earlier, the hermeneutics of memory. The traumatized memory precisely will interpret the object and the place like it just happened yesterday, right? And you thought sometimes that you were living already, that you are already healed, but there are really times that will strike you, that and then will bring back all the flashbacks. Yeah, and that's precisely what trauma is all about. That's why sometimes medication helps. To have medications will really help you stabilize the workings of your mind, okay, because it influences the chemical reactions of your brain. That's why especially for those who have PTSDs, diba, they are taking precisely medications in order to help them cope with their coping mechanisms. I agree.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And thank you for your insight or reaction, Miss Dara Sofia. Another one coming from the chat from Miss Jewel Janelle Alvarez.
Is
She
that
says
all right,
that my
Jewel?
trauma...
Continue. Hindi. Inaano ko lang, thank you, Jewel, for, I think this is a very private
sharing po, sir,
sharing. But
very
I think,
personal.
yeah, but I think na okay naman kasi shinare niya lang. Anyway, Jack, thank you.
Sige po. She says that my traumatic experience had something to do with my father leaving us. He blamed my mom for it, even though we found out he's been having an affair behind her back. It has caused me to experience clinical depression. It has caused me to cry every day in school and slide into self-harming as a way to ease my pain. Trauma doesn't have to always be affecting you directly. He never harmed me, physically or emotionally, but the effect he had on my mom was enough to trigger me. Any reactions towards that, sir?
Yeah, well, first, I would just like to say thank you for sharing this story. And in the framework that I am using in my research, actually, to tell your story, that's why we have narrative exchanges, right? We tell each other our stories so that we can learn from each other. And I know traumatized memory can really have this relief when it's able to share its story. So I just would like to thank Jewel for this sharing. And yes, traumas doesn't have to be tangible. It's something that you can see, something that you can touch. Okay, sometimes it's deep deep within you. It's in your very psyche. It's in your very mind. It happens there. Diba? Like what yung line kay Shakespeare sa Othello na sinasabi niyang it knows in our mind. Diba? Talagang kinakagat niya ang sa imong isip. And you feel helpless when it happens. And that's precisely why we have trauma. So thank you, Jewel.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, Jewel, for your bravery and for giving us the opportunity to share your story with us. Okay. Okay. We have another question from Miss Judy Pulong. With all due respect, po, in this sense, can traumas be cured? Po? Any?
Yeah. Well.
Answer?
In fact, neuroscientific advances today would directly influence the way your brain works, right? That's why I said medication. So there are already medications that can directly, quote unquote, erase that memory from your brain. So in that case, if you are defining cure in that sense, then it can be. Now, curing in the sense that what I presented in this lecture, forgetting is also quote unquote a cure, right? When forgetting in a sense that I do not erase the traces, but I live with the scars. Okay, that I am already, I accept that I am scarred. Then it's also a kind of curing when I learn precisely that wounds are not scars and scars are not wounds, right? I already see them as they are. So that's how I am already able to confront the memory as it is. So in the sense, it is if that's what you mean by cure, then psychoanalytically and neuroscientifically, then it can be.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And I hope for Julie, sir did answer your question. Okay. Another question po from Gabriel Nunez. Sir, what is the significance of Sancte's autism spectrum disorder in the plot? Would it work if he had a different disability?
I am not. I specifically did not touch on autism because that involves one really specific research. But I would like to highlight though in that series is how and we know this from other autistic children, autistic persons, that they really have high memory. If you also watch that series, The Good Doctor, okay, the original Korean, the doctor was also autistic, the surgeon. Okay, so that's why in the story, Sante cannot also move on. It takes him, it was difficult for him to move on because he actually has that his memory is also affected by his autism disorder, right? He has that very strong memory, vivid memory of things that can happen. And scientifically speaking, that really happens with some people with autism. They really have strong, clear memory of what happened. So kumbaga, pinapalakas niya yung trauma na naaalala ni Sangte. Thanks, Gab.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Mr. Gabriel, for the question. We have another coming from Lara Estelle Filgueras. What if what you are feeling is always melancholia? How do you go from it to mourning? Kasi sir, parang ang hirap since they really are there really is pleasure in melancholia. Is there like a time frame in which you need to move on from melancholia to mourning?
Hi Lara. Let me address the last part of the question. No, there is no time frame. Right? There is no time frame in Okay, I have to move on now. So parang may deadline ba ako? Wala namang deadline siguro. But yung ano dito, yung point is, what if you are always, what you are always feeling is always melancholia? That, you see, if you phrase that question that way, then you already know that, hey, I have to stop this, right? I am melancholic. I have to move on. I have to accept already the things that had happened. I have to take the truth. Okay? I have to let pleasure bow down to truth. Okay? So just to illustrate this, for example, when my mother died, okay, it was a very traumatic death. Alam to ng mga estudyante ko, diba, we spent 21 days in the ICU, nakita mo kung paano nag-deteriorate. Diba, after the death, diba, may melancholia nangyari na, okay, you are living as if andyan pa siya. Diba, may mga rituals tayo. May mga rituals tayo na ginagawa na, okay, you still, hindi ko pa magalaw yung mga gamit niya kasi gusto ko pang naaalala siya like she is there. But time gives. Ito yung sinasabi natin sa phenomenology. Time gives. Time itself brings you into that. Na malalaman mo na, I am also what? I am also slowly mourning already. And mourning can take, Can take longer time than the melancholia. Now, the second part of my question is, that's why Freud and psychoanalysis, the psychoanalytic tradition, even until now, would say you have to work on it. Okay? Gusto ko yung tanong what if you are feeling is always melancholia? May awareness ka na melancholic ka, so you have to work on it already. Right? So the time has come for you na baka nga talaga melancholia yung nangyayari. Sometimes healing happens just eventually. Hindi mo alam naka-move on ka na pala. Right? Hindi mo alam. Iba-ibang klase ng pagpa-process yung mind natin kasi.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. From a question now coming from Mr. Christian John. Sir, do children react differently than adults in terms of trauma?
Forgive me, Christian. I really would not like to answer that because I think that question should be answered by a more, those who are really in this field, right? Although in the researches that I have read, of course they have differences in coping, for example, and children can have a more traumatized memories. Okay, because even trauma, according sa neurobiology, traumas can actually happen even epigenetically. Ibig sabihin, nasa wound pa lang ng bata, pwedeng nangyayari na yung trauma sa kanya. So madami diyang factors. But I really don't want to answer that very much because I might give wrong information. So maybe perhaps we next time we have a dialogue between the psychology and the philosophy on topics like this. So sorry, Christian, but let's be professional on these matters. Let the experts say about that.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, and I hope Christian understood where Sir Adrian is coming from. Okay, sir. Next we have a more of a sharing, sir.
Mm-hmm.
The anonymous user said, "My trauma came from the fact that I have been mentally bullied since elementary until high school. Despite the fact that no bullying occurred during my college time, I am still having this fear that everyone will indirectly attack me, even if there is none. As a matter of fact, high school setting still haunts me in my dreams from time to time, meaning I keep having dreams that I am still in high school. People around me say it should make me stronger, and my brain, my family, and my friends tell me to move on, but my subconscious is suggesting me otherwise. Any reaction towards that?
Well, that proves the point of the lecture to this afternoon, right? That that really proves the point. And I just would like to bring it to our topic this afternoon. That's why using that bullied memory and identity, precisely the healing of that memory will give you the what? The healing, the reconstructing, the retelling of your identity. First, I have to accept I was bullied. That was really, my experience. But that's why we need guides, right? That's why I also highlighted the character of the head of the OK Psychiatric Hospitals. Okay, uh, fools. It's foolishness to believe that you can heal yourself. We need guides. We need others to listen to us at least, and that's precisely what the head doctor is signifying in this series. Okay, so you see here now the discrepancy between the identity that I have to construct right now, okay, and a lingering identity that that is coming precisely from that bullied experience. Ito yung tinatawag natin kanina, di ba? Dissociated na ako sa present ko because it precisely was my experience in the past. So, for me to reconstruct my identity in the present, I have precisely to confront that 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 experience. Okay, I have to confront it, and in confronting it, perhaps there are other details. One that can revise my plot of the bullying, or can actually strengthen my claim that I am bullied. But regardless of whatever it may be, I have to confront it. Okay, if I need some medications, then so be it. Okay, we need to be healed. We need to be healed so that we can retell our stories in the present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to our anonymous user, I hope sir help you in ways so that you can start your healing. And of course, everyone of us is rooting for you, and to everyone struggling right now. Okay. We have, I think this is more of an insight coming from Ms. Mona Benaflor. Sir, thank you po for the wonderful discussion. I am fascinated with your insights regarding the concepts such as identity narratives and how trauma and memory is affected by so. But since po, sir, you tackled a bit about trauma response and how trauma and memory work, Freudian concept, short or long-term memory, my question po is, how do you think does completely forgetting their memory as a trauma response plays as a part in their identity, narrative, or implotment? Thank you.
Hi, Mona. Nice hearing from you again. Mona, clarify ko lang. So, yung tanong mo is a complete forgetting, like in the case of amnesia. Is that your question? A complete forgetting, for complete forgetfulness, and how does it play in the identity narrative? Kasi yun yung nakita ko yeah, okay, yes. So there are many schools of thought when we yes, Mona, and there are many schools of thought when we discuss amnesia, right? But if Ricoeur and his hermeneutics of memory, and yung tinatawag ko ngayon, yung pinag-uusapan natin ngayon, I am coming from the school where if it is amnesia, like it's
totally erased in your memory, then there is really nothing to remember. And if there's nothing to remember, there is nothing to forget. So, if it's complete amnesia, kung wala talaga siya sa isip ko, na wala siya sa mind ko, hindi ko siya mai-implant sa ginagawa kong narrative identity. I can only put into my story those things that I can remember. That's why, and I understand maybe where the question is coming from, because precisely amnesia is also a coping mechanism of the brain. When the experience is too much painful, the brain reacts that it just, it erases the memory from itself because it's too painful to remember. And if there is no trace at all, then in the story that I am doing right now, maybe I can still not implant it in my narrative. Right? So, and that's part of a traumatized identity or identity in general. It's not everything about your life you tell in your story, right? There are many things that we forget. Okay, and thanks be to God, we can forget. Remember, if everything is stored in our mind, I don't want that kind of life. So, let us not demonize forgetting. Na, di ba? Sometimes, mabuti na lang nakalimutan natin, or else I don't know how will I live if everything is stored in our brain.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And I hope from Ms. Mona, sir answered your question. Sir, another question po regarding the context ng pag-forget rin po. Sabi ni Ms. Hyacinth, sir, isn't forgetting a sign of trauma? Like, is it possible po to have trauma and not remember fully about what happened?
Okay.
Sir, ang question.
Yeah, and I think I already touched on this. Na sometimes the trauma can really be very, very strong, that it causes you amnesia. 'Di ba? May hindi mo na lalaman hindi mo na nararamdaman, or you can no longer recall what really happened. If you have Netflix, sorry, in Netflix, napaka-ano naman nung paka-phrase ko. If you are watching Netflix, there is actually a series there on understanding the brain. Right? And you can watch on it. That's a very, very informative series. Na, di ba, understanding the brain, and they are talking about this amnesia. Okay? And sometimes yung may isa doon na nagkaroon siya ng aksidente, tapos sobra na yung, and actually this lecture was triggered by that series, na sobra yung forgetfulness niya that he cannot even remember the details like just hours ago. Kasi talagang affected na yung brain niya. So, doon nagsimula yung tanong ko. So, pag tinanong ka kung sino ka, ano na yung sagot mo? Kung hindi ko nga pala, di ba, hindi mo maalala kung ano yung mga nangyari sa buhay mo. So, may problema sa identity. Ito yung di ba, ito yung philosophical na pinag-iisipan ko ngayon. Ngayon, kung amnesia naman siya, ito na yung sagot ko kay Mona kanina, ulitin ko lang na, diba, kung total amnesia siya, and from the framework of narrative theory, I cannot incorporate it to the story that I am building about myself, because what can I say about that? I cannot even remember. But for partial, diba, yung trauma naman na may naaalala pa ako, then it's where that I can implant it again, di ba? It's the memory that I can implant. It's the memory that I can work on in constructing whatever I call identity. Yeah, Hyacinth.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And to Ms. Hyacinth, I hope sir gave you a well-founded answer. Sir, we have a question coming from our Facebook Live. From our Facebook viewer, Edward, he says that telling one's narrative as a way to heal or move on from trauma implies that other is ready to listen. But in case of racial violence and discrimination experienced by ethnic minorities, they are not granted the space to enunciate their grievances. How do you think we can resolve this tension?
Yeah. Hi. Hi, Edward. I think I know who that Edward is. Yeah. Yeah. That's why this full disclosure, actually this yung trauma na ginagawa ko, yung research on trauma. Ngayon lang ito nag-psychology na ganitong napaka-personal level, individual level. Because my research is actually on precisely what Edward was asking here. Yun nga Edward, yung 'di ba, if the traumatized identities, 'di ba, in the colonized or what we call in the subjugated identities that who cannot speak, they cannot even tell their stories. Okay, that's why and there's no one to listen to them, right? So how can we even have this narrative exchange, right? And that's the problem that we are that post-colonial studies would ask, right? So how do we do that? Well, by ensuring that we open spaces bit by bit, okay, little by little, that we open spaces precisely for these identities to come out. Okay, so even gender identities can be interpreted from the perspective of trauma studies. Okay, for example, homosexuality. Okay, homosexuals cannot even express themselves. The LGBTQs cannot express themselves because these identities have undergone a long history of trauma that in the end they no longer know who they are. But precisely what we are doing now is what? Is to give them space to tell their stories, and we who may not be ready before to listen to them are invited precisely to listen to these stories, so that in confronting their stories, we also are able to confront the very narrative of our identity. Na baka, 'di ba? Na baka, hey, yung identity ko pala na, for example, 'di ba, heterosexuality lang yung norm. Ay baka kailangan ko ring i-reimplant yung narrative na yon. Kaya nga in narrative exchanges, 'di ba? Both the listener and the speaker can end up re-implanting, re-narrating their very stories. Thank you, Edward, for that question. Sorry, Edward, na-excite ako.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, Sir Edward, for that question. We have another, I guess this is more of an insight coming from Miss Sophia Pauline D. Arias. Thank you, sir, for that very informative session. Maybe because of certain traumas, some people have a hard time to bring back their trust to those people or things who directly, indirectly hurt them. Also, people who have traumatic experience might feel like being caged to that very memory. That's why they feel like they cannot move forward. But as a matter of fact, they can if they will. In addition, people should take away the mentality that seeking help from psychologists, psychiatrists, or other professionals are only for those who have disorders or such. But it's supposed to be for everyone to be able to have a guide and be healed. Any comment towards it?
Yeah, I agree. But ngayon lang gusto ko lang yung line na they can if they will. In a traumatized memory, it's more like they have to will. They have to will so that they can. It's not always they can if they will. No, a traumatized memory, no matter how they want, they can't. Okay? That's how trauma incapacitates us. Okay? That's how violence incapacitates even the act of narration. That even though I want to tell the story, but I am traumatized so much that I can't. So we have to will it. So by what? By going to therapy, by medication, or political, yung tanong nga ni Edward, by joining the, di ba, by joining the movement so that more spaces can be open for narratives like this. We have to will it so that we could. Now, part of memory, this is just another comment on Sophia. Part of memory healing, we should not forget here, is the possibility of forgiveness. Forgiveness is also part of the healing, is part of moving forward from the traumatized memory. Okay, and for those who have been students for last year sa ACP natin, di ba? I talked about forgiveness, but it's more like of cheesy, romantic forgiveness. But yeah, a healed memory from the trauma, in the end, becomes capable of forgiving. Okay, that's why you cannot force someone to forgive. Right? You cannot force someone if that person cannot just heal itself yet. Right? We have to pray for the forgiveness to arrive, if that is the case. So we should not forget that in the picture, in this narrative of trauma and healing, forgiveness plays a major role.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I believe this is our last question coming from Taya Mora.
Yeah.
This is such a very informative webinar. Although there are people na genuinely traumatized with some leading to mental health problems. How about those people that are glorifying traumas and using mental health as either an aesthetic or as a form of trend? How would you like to address that, sir?
I only have one line for this. Stop it. I mean, trauma is not something that we have to glorify. It's not something that you make it as a trend. Like, you don't make it as your excuse to do shit things. Sorry for that words. Right? Stop it.
Yes.
That's all that I can say. Sure, Sir Sadi.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sir Adrian, and thank you, Sir Sunny. Okay. Once again, thank you so much, Sir Adrian, and to those who participated in the open forum. Now we have come to the end of the program. I'm sure that all of us have learned something from this ACP topic and have been inspired to use our talents and skills and get involved in programs and advocacies that would impact people empowerment and social development. To show our gratitude for Sir Adrian Remodo for his time and effort, we now present this certificate of appreciation with the citation. Office of Student Affairs, Ateneo de Naga University, presents this certificate of appreciation to Adrian V. Remodo in grateful recognition of his expertise and service as a resource speaker in the alternative class program, Scars Are Not Wounds, Philosophy in the KDrama, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, held on April 16, 2021, given the 16th of April 2021 at the Ateneo de Naga University, City of Naga, Philippines. Signed, Rodolfo S. B. Bertrus Jr., Director of the Office of Student Affairs, Janet B. Badong Badilla, Executive Director for Mission and Identity, Dr. Alfredo Sabay, Vice President for Academic Affairs, and Father Roberto E. N. Rivera, S.J., University President.
Thank you.
Again, we thank you, Sir Adrian, for this ACP session will not be possible without your presence. without your presence. Once again, let us all give a warm round of virtual applause to Sir Adrian Remodo.
Thank you very
Okay.
much for this. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Let's have more K-drama sessions. Let's continue the conversation in the Google Classroom. And again, please follow TikTok's Everyday Philosophies in your Facebook so that philosophy like this can be continued in that platform. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Please be reminded to fill out the evaluation forms we posted in Google Classroom and, of course, the Zoom chat. The certificate of attendance shall only be awarded to those who accomplish the evaluation forms. And, of course, make sure to to put the correct spelling of your names so not to have your certificates misspelled. Okay? We hope that you enjoyed this talk and gained insights and learnings from it. This ends our talk on Scars Are Not Wounds, Philosophy in the K-Drama, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. Thank you for being with us in this alternative class program of 2021. Please stay healthy and safe, Ateneans, and thank you very much.